Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Tridion Docs 1503 bootcamps. And in this particular case, we're going to talk about ISHRemote version 8.2, an ISHRemoteMcpServer. And I am Dave de Meyer, System Architect on Tridion Docs. So the agenda is for everybody a quick introduction of what ISHRemote is about and where it lives. And then there is a difference between PowerShell and PWSH. What is that about? Where everything lives, open source, delivery, and installation. And then we'll dig it a little bit deeper with model context protocols and the tools. And then we head for a demo or two. So as a reminder, ISHRemote is a PowerShell module on top of Tridion Docs Content Manager. It already exists for a long time. It is a library that allows you to connect the dots and do automation on the business layer of the component content management system. ISHRemote works on the various releases, so it was fielded as Tridion Docs, Knowledge Center, Live Content Architect, TriSoft InfoShare, and that's actually the InfoShare, the ISH, that's where a lot of the ISH name terminology comes from. ISHRemote is fully on top of the Web Services API, the public API. So what you can do in ISHRemote is what you can do in your custom applications. And because it's open source, it is a showcase of examples. We have a couple of other PowerShell libraries. The other well-known library is ISHDeploy. ISHDeploy is local on a Windows application server to configure the server-side components, while ISHRemote is typically more on the client machine, so our laptops or else. So what is PowerShell? PowerShell, or in this example here, Windows PowerShell version 5.1. That is the PowerShell that comes installed with many of the Windows editions, client and server editions. It relies on .NET Framework 4.8, which means by definition that it is Windows only. It's in that PowerShell.exe that you load libraries. It can be ISHRemote library, the ISHDeploy library is in there, but there are many other libraries. A favorite of mine is ImportXL, which allows nice integrations to create Excel files and do some custom reports. Over time, there is also a PowerShell version 7, and the version 7 is technically the executable pwsh.exe, and that is the cross-platform edition of PowerShell. It relies on .NET 6, 8, 10 over time, so 7.6 is linked to .NET 10, and that is cross-platform. That's where we load similar modules. And because it's cross-platform, it also allows ISHRemote to run on Linux and macOS, which is nice. ISHRemote is open source. At the bottom of the page here, you see the URL where it lives. You can look at the source code. It holds example on how to do stuff. It holds description on some concepts. Every time there is a new build of ISHRemote, all of the tests are run. So there are by now 1,100 and something tests that are run on the Windows PowerShell and on the cross-platform PowerShell. And as you can see from a build example, so a GitHub action, it builds the solution, it runs the test, and even publishes it to the PowerShell gallery. And the PowerShell gallery is the way that the library becomes publicly available to you all. Over the years, many years, as you can see, we released various versions of it. First versions were around 2015, 2016, and mostly with the old security paradigm of WS Federation, WS Trust. In the later releases, version 8.0, we added modern authentication, OpenID Connect, but all of the other stuff is still there. The plumbing to connect to the deprecated SOAP API is still there. And now we released version 8.2, which also holds a model context protocol server inside. So as said, the delivery goes to the PowerShell gallery, which is offered by Microsoft. It's a public gallery from where you can download all kinds of packages. But as you can see on the screen, yeah, we have all of our releases there. And over the years, we hit 18,000 downloads across the various releases, and even the latest release, although not really widely announced yet, is 200 hits already. So let's see how that works in practice. What you currently see on my screen is Visual Studio Code in a lighter theme, so that's hopefully easier to read. And some people might be reminded with this look and feel of an integrated script editor from the days gone. If I run a line of code here, then you can see the version here is PowerShell 7.6.1, and it is the core edition. If you would run this on a Windows PowerShell, you would get desktop edition. When I check if there are things installed, then you see I have various things installed, but I do not have ISHRemote installed. And this is the most simple way to set up ISHRemote. From that PowerShell gallery, it will now download it and install it. And if I run it, what is installed, then you'll see I have ISHRemote 8.2.1. To prove that it works, I can create a session here to my local environment. And that will, because I didn't specify any authentication method, that should raise a browser. It's opening the wrong browser, so I'm going to go here. I was already authenticated on this system here, so I get signed in. In turn, I now have a session here that holds how I signed in. So it says the URL I used, and I was authenticated as admin2 user, and that's how we can run some stuff. So if we dig a little deeper, actually that session has a lot more properties to it. So I'll show, that's a slightly weird layout. Okay. It holds the URL, how we were authenticated, usernames that I have, the remote server version, my ISHRemote version, a setup, because it retrieves the whole, the cards and the fields, so the whole setup of the remote system is read, including custom fields if you have them, authentication context, access token, some timeouts, and then a bunch of proxies, which are authenticated proxies to work with the public API. This is a way to retrieve one of those values, so you can simply retrieve something. And this is a commandlet inside ISHRemote that shows you the whole setup. There's actually a nicer way. If you pipe this result, so this returns an object, a memory object, and that memory object can be passed to the next commandlet, and in turn it erases a dialog that is built in PowerShell where you can review stuff. So you can filter on where is the fauthor field, on which types is it, it's linked to the user as a data source, it's mandatory, one, you can search on it and whatever. So a lot of goodies in this setup. You can also retrieve list of values with more information. You can find electronic document types. And if I get the result of those electronic document types and I put them in a PowerShell variable, then I can take the first item out of that array of entries, which is PDF. I can ask it give me only the MIME type of that first entry. And to, yeah, the power of the language is if I now remove that first element from the array and do this, then it actually iterates over that column and you see all of the MIME types. Other commandlets, find this user or user group, so a lot in the settings area. There is even a built-in simple search that searches for stuff and retrieves a bunch of hits. But that is relatively simple because lists of users and user groups are finite, but your repository might be very big. So it's not advised to do a find me every content object in your repository because you might be pulling in, downloading gigabytes of material, so something will break. But there are ways to do that. So there is a nice commandlet that allows you to iterate over a folder structure. So the highlighted item here will iterate and it will recursively retrieve the folders. And those folders I can pass around and I can actually ask, give me all of the XML objects in there. And that one I can pass around again and say for each of those objects, count me, if it's an image, then +1 on the image counter. And if it's an XML entity, then +1 on that one. So in turn, if I run this, I'm not too heavy on the memory side because I create objects, but I also immediately release them. But I'm still navigating through my repository where you'll see how many folders were already processed, but also how many still to go. That number on the right jumps up because it doesn't really count all folders up front. It just goes deeper and deeper recursively. And sometimes it finds a big folder and it increases the amount. And I hope it's not freezing up. Okay. I expect around 600 and then we should get a count and then we'll return to the slide deck. So here you see the result. But this is a way to get inspired on how you can navigate through your repository without a massive retrieve operation. So that's the first part. Put these entries in the slide on what I showed. So nothing special here. As said earlier, ISHRemote versus the Tridion docs releases. Yeah, ISHRemote works across all Tridion docs versions, so we test for that. And yeah, there are various SOAP APIs available. This is, well, the version 1 of the past. WS Trust SOAP is the one which is deprecated. And since the introduction of modern authentication, we should all be on this one. And we're gradually moving to OpenAPI, which is the REST-based one. So, but it's all there, it's all working. To go a little bit deeper on where we are now with Tridion docs 15.3, on the right-hand side, you recognize the layers of the software, how we talk to the database, the business logic, checkpoints. There is a API 2.5 and an API 3.0. The API 2.5 talks in XML objects like ish fields and ish objects and all of those, while API 3.0 is more JSON oriented with more descriptive objects. On top of API 2.5, we have 3 antennas. One is the very old one, which is the ASMX SOAP. Then there is WCF in the old security paradigm, and then the blue one is WCF in the new paradigm. Over time, we consider the yellow blocks to disappear because we want to break our ties to Windows.NET framework and only have .NET or cross-platform .NET in the product line. As you can see, the API 2.5 layer is shared with 3 communication layers, but in the end, they all have a similar description. So this is an extract from the documentation that says what the API call looks like, the parameters, how you can ask it a question, what it will return. So that's described, and that is in turn also what ISHRemote uses. Now, because ISHRemote uses that, it layers that public API call. And if you look a little bit deeper in the help of the ISHRemote commandlet, so at the top you see get help of the get ish folder commandlet, then you see that we have a naming convention, we have a description on how to use it, we have some syntax, some parameter sets on what are meaningful combinations, we have descriptions on the parameters, we have examples. That's in almost every commandlet you'll find this structure. And that, of course, got us thinking like, okay, if we have that kind of structured language, and we have ISHRemote that can create a session towards your Tridion docs repository, and it allows easier retrieval. It's a bit opinionated. For example, the API would say you need to specify which fields you want to retrieve. ISHRemote gives you already good defaults, which you can override on which metadata to retrieve, what is meaningful basic metadata or system metadata that you can work with. So ISHRemote has a lot of those goodies in place, which makes the API a little bit easier to use. But for those who read a bit more about the model context protocol, where there are tools. Yeah, what is a tool? A tool is also a naming convention and help text and a description on how to use it and some best practices. So a commandlet and a tool, they look alike. And that's what got me going on how to develop that. This is a deployment diagram, if you will, on what we have with PowerShell and Visual Studio Code. So in a moment, I will use Visual Studio Code to connect to my MCP server. Typically, that happens over an NCP JSON file. Visual Studio Code runs in a process, and on the bottom, that blue screen that I showed earlier, that is a terminal. In my example, it's process ID 2. And if we then press the start of the MCP server, then an extra PowerShell is started, process ID 3, and that's where the MCP server will run and will listen for commands coming from the LLM, from the large language model. If we would ask as a first operation, hey, create me a session, then the session is created inside that process, and it will do the whole bounce around for security. So it will go to the trusted browser, go to access management, the web services, all what is required. So it is an authenticated MCP server. And that's the one I will demo right now. So still here, as said, I need to create that folder. That's how it works in Visual Studio Code, but you'll find something similar in other systems. And inside that file, I need to register my MCP server. So what is the ISHRemote MCP server? It's over standard I/O. It launches a PowerShell process with a couple of commands that is not really visible and popping up on screen. It will start. It's a commandlet from ISHRemote that it will start, and it will register the commandlets that you want to make available from tools. And optionally, you can put a log path in it if you want to see what's happening behind the scenes. But that's it. As you already can see, it detected several tools, and if I now press start, it is running, and then we can go to the right-hand side here, In here, I have set it to agent mode. I'm using Claude Sonnet 4.6. So you have to pick a reasonably good LLM because you're still asking it some tough questions. But let's get started with a create me a session. And now the LLM will look like, oh, how do I create a session? And then it found in the tools offered a new ISH session. That is a tool. Currently it works. It pops up my browser. Need to log in. It redirects. And you see it created a session. Admin 2, client version is 821, which is the PowerShell version. And now you can ask it questions. So I prepared a couple of questions, but the scenario always looks a little bit different. It's like talking to a fresh new person every time, but how many PDF outputs are there? So it knows about various concepts that are around the Tridion doc system or around the API, and looked up and it found all of these outputs. But you can also ask it some questions on like, yeah, but what does that mean, an output? So what is the difference between an output format and a publication output? And it can tell you what the difference is. An output is a configuration template that keeps things together, while a publication output is the final result, a PDF or a zip. So yeah, it clearly explains that, and you can ask it the same question, and it will give you a variation of this text every time. So I can now ask, are there other system fields on an output format that drive options? It will check the setup of the system, because that's what it got strongly hinted, like don't make up fields, go and check them. And here you see how it looks at these entries and what kind of fields there are. And so, yeah, it's quite good. So a very open-ended question, which one has debugging enabled? Quite tough. My hope is that it would hint to the fish cleanup, but let's see what the LLM does. So now it tries to get an answer over the various tools it has available to find out what it can offer and how it can do that, to understand what my question was versus what the system has to offer. So it will run multiple tools. Okay. So now it wants to run the commandlet. I will skip this here. I think this is great entertainment, and I never know what we will get in the end. Yeah, but it's getting there. So cleanup true, cleanup false. So this is me querying the system. You don't want to do this between a test environment and a production environment. Therefore, I would still advise like write a script because that makes it reproducible. So the next question here is, can you write me a script which I can reuse from this test to a future production environment that will set the cleanup flag to disabled for all output formats. So this, from a product perspective, means that there are no temporary files anymore, that everything gets cleaned up after every publish operation. And now, because the tools look so much alike to the commandlets, the LLM can actually help you write a script. It has basic PowerShell knowledge, but it also has ISHRemote knowledge now. And it's the two of them together that will get you going, that an empty file suddenly becomes a file which gets you started and where you can see if that makes sense. So it's creating a new file. I hope to show you that file in a moment, as we are all curious of what it made up. Okay. Where did I put that file? So here you see it created a file with a help at the top, parameters. It shows client secret as a way of authentication, but yeah, we know that we could theoretically remove this piece and just do interactive authentication. But it did find the fish cleanup, and it allows you to set the value. It will contain errors, but by iteration with the LLM, you will get closer to it. So that brings me back to the slide set. I think there are two scenarios for this MCP server. That's just understanding, querying your system, asking it questions like, how does it work? How do concepts relate to one another? I hoped I could show you that in the demo. You could have your own scenario on questioning which users are having the administrator role, etc., etc. The second part is assisting, where it starts you already with basic scripts, but be aware, yeah, it gives a different response every time. I never got, even in this demo scenario, I never got the same answer in the same script as a result. So if you want something reproducible, then I really advise you to still take the script route, because that is a safer option and something more reliable. What else happened in ISHRemote version 8.02? It is the version that you need. Version 8.02 is the version that you need for PowerShell 7.6, because there was a library that had a breaking change. So that happened. So there is now an explicit .NET 10 compilation, as you can see. And the second part is that to get more reliable interactions with the LLM, ISHRemote had to also be a little bit more reliable. So there was some time spent on recovery of certain situations. So when sessions expire after 57 minutes, it will now do retry and refresh them if that possibility is enabled. It will get new tokens. When it gets into the communication object is faulted state, it will try to recover from that. So there are a couple of stability improvements that are worthwhile for all of us, not only the LLM. And that brings me to the end of this session. So I would like to thank you all and enjoy the next sessions.